The pre-implantation period takes place during the first week after conception. When a woman's egg is penetrated by a man's sperm, the union creates a zygote. When this happens, the final stages of meiosis occurs in the ovum, which shuffles the parent's chromosomes. The zygote receives half its chromosomes from the woman and half from the man. After fertilization, mitosis occurs, which splits the zygote into more and more cells because of cleavage, until it eventually becomes a blastocyst. The blastocyst travels from the site of fertilization to the uterus. By the end of the first week, it implants itself in the innermost lining of the uterus.
The embryonic period begins at week 2. During this week, the blastocyst continues to grow. Changes in cellular morphogenesis occur, such as the creation of cell layers, until it eventually develops into a bilaminar embryonic disc. During the third week, proliferation of cells within the disc form the primitive streak, so that the right and left halves are bilaterally symmetrical. The mesoderm and endoderm cell layers are created, thickening the disc into a trilaminar embryonic disc. The epiblast layer becomes ectoderm. The oropharyngeal membrane forms at the cephalic end, and the central nervous system begins to develop. The neuroectoderm arises from the ectoderm. The neural plate thickens into a neural groove, which is surrounded by neural folds. Neural crest cells develop from the neuroectoderm, which are later dispersed within the mesenchyme. The mesoderm forms somites. The fourth week begins when the neural folds undergo fusion from the neural tube. The trilaminar disc undergoes embryonic folding, which establishes the axis. A long hollow tube stretching from the oropharyngeal membrane to the colloquial membrane is created by the embryonic cell layers. The foregut, or primitive pharynx, arises and is on the anterior side. The hindgut arises on the posterior side and is what will become the rest of the mature pharynx and the remainder of the digestive tract. Major face development occurs, such as the creation of the primitive mouth, which turns into the sternodium, the mandibular arch, the maxillary process, the frontonasal process, and the nose. The oropharyngeal membrane disintegrates. Mechal cartilage forms within each side of the mandibular arch. 2 lens plissodes, 2 otic plissodes, and 2 nasal plissodes, which turn into the nasal pits, are formed. Development of the neck occurs, beginning with the formation of brachial arches. During the 5th week, the heart, brain, spinal cord, muscles, and bones begin to develop. The palate begins to form, as well as palatal shelves. The median tongue bud develops. During the 6th week, the upper lip forms, as well as limb buds. In week 7, many organs are continuing to develop, such as the lungs, intestines, and appendix. The nostrils, mouth, and eyes become prominent. By week 8, the tongue formation is completed. Eyelid folds are formed, and the baby gets webbed fingers and toes. The fetal period starts at the 9th week after fertilization. Here, the fetus is typically about the size of a grape. Between week 10 and week 12, the head makes up nearly half of the fetus size. Its eyelids close during this period. Fingernails and hair start to grow, and the placenta starts to function. The ears begin to take their final shape, and tooth buds appear. The genitals begin to take on proper gender characteristics, and the elbows and knees can bend. Between weeks 13 and 16, the baby begins to move with regularity. The ankles and wrists have formed. The neck grows longer, and the chin becomes more prominent. The body is covered by a fine hair called languo. Bones get harder, and a heartbeat is audible. Week 17 to 20 is a period of rapid growth for the fetus. Increased fetal movement is likely to become apparent. During this period, the sex of the baby can be discovered. The baby's reflexes are kicking in. It can yawn, stretch, and hiccup. Skin develops, and the baby can begin responding to sounds. Between weeks 21 and 25, the fetus develops fat to keep warm. The immune system begins to develop. The skin becomes opaque instead of transparent. From week 26 to 30, the fetus's nervous system begins to control some of its bodily functions. The baby can now cry and actively move its arms and legs. The eyebrows and eyelashes are formed. Between weeks 31 and 34, the baby practices opening its eyes and breathing. It begins to fill all the space in the uterus. Besides the lungs, the organs are fully developed. By week 35 to 40, fat continues to develop, and the baby should assume the head-down position. The skin gets pinker. The baby drops to the mother's pelvis in preparation for delivery.